Waiting room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. I'd been sitting in that plastic chair for 40 minutes, staring at a water stain on the ceiling shaped like the state of Florida, trying to remember how to breathe normally. My husband was behind a closed door down the hall. Routine blood work, the nurse had said. Just a follow-up from his physical last month. Nothing to worry about. But I had spent 21 years worrying about exactly this kind of moment. The kind where a door opens and someone walks out knowing something they didn't know before. My name is Claire, and I need to tell you something I have never said out loud to another person. I was 26 when I met my husband. He was 30, an engineer with a quiet laugh and the kind of steadiness that I had been chasing my whole life without knowing it. We met at a mutual friend's cookout in Charlotte on a Saturday in June. He spent 40 minutes explaining how bridges handle wind load, and I stood there genuinely fascinated, which probably tells you everything about why I fell for him. We dated for 14 months. He was the first person who ever made me feel like I didn't have to perform, like I could just exist and that would be enough. I said yes when he proposed on the back porch of his parents' house in Asheville. His mother cried. My mother called it the best day of her life. I believed, in that moment, that I was the luckiest person I knew. What I did not tell anyone, not my mother, not my best friend, not a single soul, was that 3 months before that proposal, I had done something I cannot explain and cannot take back. His name was Derek. He worked in my office building 2 floors up. We were close. We had coffee twice, talked about nothing important, and then one night after a work happy hour where I drank more than I should have, something happened that I have spent 2 decades trying to understand and failing. It wasn't a relationship. It wasn't love. It was one night that ended before midnight and left me sitting in my car in a parking garage on Trade Street, not recognizing the person I was. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself my husband would never know. I told myself a lot of things that year. I found out I was pregnant 6 weeks after the wedding. My husband was so happy. I watched him read the test results over my shoulder in our bathroom, and the way his face changed, that slow, disbelieving smile, was the most painful thing I had ever seen. Because I didn't know. I genuinely did not know whose baby it was. The timing was close enough to be either. And I was too terrified to find out. I told myself that it was my husband's. I told myself this, the way you tell yourself something when you know you're lying. I built the lie foundation, and then walls, and then a roof, and I moved into it and called it home. Our daughter was born on a Tuesday in April. We named her Maisie. She had my husband's forehead and my mother's eyes, and when my husband held her in that hospital room and said, "She's perfect, Claire. She is absolutely perfect," I felt something crack open in me that never fully healed. I loved my daughter more than I had ever loved anything, and loving her completely required me to keep lying completely. So that is what I did. We moved to a house in Mooresville when Maisie was 2. Suburban street, good school district, neighbors who waved from driveways. My husband coached her soccer team when she was 7. He drove her to piano lessons every Thursday for 4 years, even though he worked long hours and was always tired. He built her a bookshelf for her room with his own hands, measured and sanded and painted it her favorite color, this pale yellow she'd picked from a paint chip at Home Depot. He was, without question, the best father I had ever seen. I watched him be that father for 21 years while carrying something that could have destroyed him. I told myself I was protecting him. I told myself what he didn't know couldn't hurt him. I told myself that Maisie was his daughter in every way that mattered, that biology was just a detail, that our family was real. Some of that was true, and some of it was just what I needed to believe to keep getting out of bed. The first time I almost told him was when Maisie was 9. She got sick. Nothing serious, a kidney infection that cleared up with antibiotics. But the doctor asked routine questions about family medical history. My husband answered confidently, listing his family's history the way you do when you've never had a reason to question it. And I sat in that pediatrician's office and nodded along, and the lie felt, for the first time, like it had physical weight, like it was sitting on my chest. I drove home that night and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes while my husband put Maisie to bed inside. I thought about going in and just saying it, sitting down at the kitchen table and saying, "There's something I need to tell you, and I'm sorry it took me this long." I didn't. I went inside and poured myself a glass of water and watched the news and went to bed. The second time was when Maisie was 15 and she went through a phase of being obsessed with ancestry kits. She'd done one through a school project and started asking about family heritage. My husband ordered one of those consumer DNA kits for himself. Excited about it, left the box on the kitchen counter. I threw it away while he was at work. I told him it must have gotten mixed up with junk mail. He ordered another one. I told him I'd seen something on the news about data privacy with those companies and I didn't feel comfortable. He thought about it, shrugged, and let it go. He trusted me that completely. That is the part that still takes my breath away. Maisie left for college in Raleigh when she was 18, University of North Carolina. She called every Sunday, came home for holidays, filled the house with her presence for a few days at a time before disappearing back into her own life. My husband and I settled into the particular quiet of being empty nesters, not unhappy, not distant, just recalibrated. We found new rhythms. Friday night dinners at this Italian place on Main Street. Saturday morning walks. He started woodworking in the garage. I joined a book club. From the outside, I imagine we looked like what we were supposed to be, a couple in their late 40s who had built something solid. I knew what we actually were. A house with a crack in the foundation that had never been repaired. Everything standing, everything functional, but that fault line always there under the surface. I thought, sometimes, that I had gotten away with it. That enough time had passed. That the past had agreed to stay where I'd put it. I was wrong. My husband retired at 58. His company did a small party for him. Cake, speeches, the kind of ordinary ceremony that marks the end of a long chapter. He came home that evening looking lighter than I'd seen him in years. He said, "I think I want to travel. I think we should actually do the things we kept saying we'd do someday." I said yes to all of it. Italy, the Pacific Coast Highway, a cabin in Montana in the fall. His doctor required a full physical before clearing him to drop off the company's insurance plan and transition to his own coverage. Standard procedure. We went together because that's what we did. Went to appointments together, sat in waiting rooms together, drove home and stopped for lunch together. I was not worried. There was no reason to be worried, except that the lab work his doctor ordered was more comprehensive than usual. And his doctor, a careful man named Dr. Patterson, who my husband had seen for 12 years, noticed something in the blood work that prompted a follow-up. That was the appointment where I sat in the plastic chair staring at the Florida-shaped water stain on the ceiling. The door opened. My husband walked out with Dr. Patterson behind him. My husband's face was the face of someone who has just learned something large and is not yet sure what to do with it. Dr. Patterson looked at me and said, "Mrs. Clark, would you mind joining us for a moment?" I don't remember standing up. I remember being in the small office. There were framed photos of mountain landscapes on the wall. I remember focusing on one of them, somewhere in Colorado, aspens, yellow and gold, while Dr. Patterson explained what the lab results had shown. My husband had a condition he had likely had his entire adult life, a genetic anomaly affecting fertility. The kind Dr. Patterson explained in careful clinical language that would have made natural conception essentially impossible. The room was very quiet. My husband was not looking at me. He was looking at his hands, folded in his lap. Dr. Patterson said something about how this was often discovered later in life, how many people lived with it unknowingly, how it didn't have any serious health implications. He said it in the gentle, practiced tone of someone who understood that the medical information was not actually the point of what was happening in the room. Then he excused himself and closed the door behind him. I don't know how long we sat there. It might have been 2 minutes. It might have been 10. My husband finally looked up. His eyes were red at the edges but dry. He had the expression of someone doing an enormous amount of work to stay present in a moment they would rather not be in. He said, "Is there something you want to tell me?" And 21 years of holding something in silence came down all at once. Not gracefully, not with any of the careful words I had imagined in that driveway when Maisie was 9. Just the truth, raw and overdue, falling out of me like something I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it had a shape. I told him everything. The night with Derek, the timing, the test I never took, the DNA kit I threw away. All of it. He listened without interrupting. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cry, not then. He just sat very still, the way he had always gone still in moments of high emotion. That steadiness that I had loved from the beginning and had spent 2 decades taking advantage of. When I finished, he nodded slowly. He said, "Okay." Just that. "Okay." He stood up, picked up his jacket from the chair, and walked out of the office. He stayed at his brother's house in Concord for 11 days. He didn't call. I texted once on day 3 and said I was sorry. He didn't respond. I didn't text again. It felt like the least I could do, to let him have the silence without me in it for once. Maisie called on a Sunday as usual, and I answered and talked to her about her classes and her roommate situation and a hiking trip she was planning, and I did not say a word about what had happened, because I did not know yet what was going to happen, and because some part of me was still, even then, trying to protect her from the thing I had done. On day 12 he came home. He put his bag down in the hallway. He sat at the kitchen table. I sat across from him. He said he had some things he needed to say, and I needed to let him say them without interrupting. I said okay. He talked, for a long time, about the marriage, about Maisie, about what it felt like, retroactively, to understand things he had chalked up to other explanations. The DNA kit, certain conversations that had puzzled him, moments where something had felt slightly off and he dismissed it because he trusted me. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't cruel. He was just thorough. He said every single thing he had apparently been holding the entire drive back from Concord, and he said it in a voice I had never heard from him before. Flat and precise and exhausted. He said, "I don't know who I'm most angry at. I'm angry at you. But I'm also angry at myself for not asking more questions. And I'm angry that I'm sitting here at 58 years old finding out that the last 21 years had this underneath them the whole time." I said, "I know." He said, "That's not enough." I said, "I know that too." We tried. I want to be honest about that part. We didn't immediately collapse. He didn't move out. We went to a couples therapist in Huntersville named Dr. Reyes, a woman in her 60s with very direct eyes who made us both uncomfortable in ways that were probably necessary. My husband asked in their second session the question I had been dreading most, "Does Maisie know?" I said no. He said, "She needs to know." I said I agreed. Then I said I was scared. He said he was too. Dr. Millie. Reyes said fear was not a reason to continue choosing someone else's comfort, including our own, over our daughter's right to her own history. We told Maisie together, over video call, on a Wednesday night. My husband held the phone because his hands were steadier than mine. We had agreed on what we were going to say and how, had practiced it, and then the moment her face appeared on screen, her bright, curious, open face, all the preparation dissolved. My husband said, "Maisie, there's something your mom and I need to tell you, and it's going to be hard to hear, but we want you to hear it from us." She went very quiet. She listened. She didn't interrupt either. She is, in this way, her father's daughter. When we finished, she stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she said, "Does this change anything about who you are to me, Dad?" And my husband, who had been so measured all evening, said very simply, "No, not for me." Maisie said, "Then it doesn't change anything for me either." She hung up about 10 minutes later. She called me back an hour after that, alone, and cried, and I let her. I didn't try to fix it or explain it or make myself feel better by seeking her reassurance. I just stayed on the phone and let her feel what she needed to feel. It was the first genuinely honest thing I had done for her in her entire life. I want to tell you that we worked through it. That therapy and honesty and time rebuilt what I had undermined. That my husband forgave me and we took that trip to Italy and it meant something redemptive. Parts of that are true. We did go to therapy for 8 months. He did eventually, I think, forgive me in the way that forgiveness sometimes looks. Not a door reopening, but the anger slowly becoming something quieter, something you put down, not because it was resolved, but because carrying it was costing too much. But we separated 14 months after that day in Dr. Patterson's office, not with drama or bitterness. We sat at the kitchen table again. We had done so much of our real living at that table, and my husband said he had done a lot of thinking, and he didn't think he could rebuild trust inside the same structure where it had been broken. He said it wasn't anger anymore. He said it was more like a kind of grief. That he loved me, still, in the way you love someone whose presence has been woven into your life for over 2 decades. But that love, he said, wasn't the same as believing we could be what we were supposed to be to each other. I said I understood. I did understand. We sold the house in Mooresville. He moved into a condo near Lake Norman. I rented a small house in Davidson, 20 minutes away. We still see each other at Maisie's events. We are careful with each other in the way that people are careful with something still fragile but no longer pretending to be whole. Maisie talks to both of us. She is navigating something no child should have to navigate, and she is doing it with more grace than I deserve from her. Derek, if you're wondering, has been married for 15 years and lives in Phoenix. I have not contacted him. He doesn't know. That is a question I am still living with. What Maisie's right to her own medical history means. What his right to know might be. What I owe to truth at this point after spending so long betraying it. I don't have an answer yet. I'm still working on the question. I tell you all of this not because I want sympathy. I stopped wanting to be let off the hook somewhere around month 3 of therapy, when Dr. Reyes pointed out that seeking absolution was just another way of making this about my own comfort. I tell you because I wasted 21 years being afraid. Afraid of what the truth would cost me, afraid of losing the life I had built on top of something broken. And what I know now, sitting in this small house in Davidson with the sound of my neighbor's kids playing outside and the particular quiet of a life that is smaller and more honest than the one I had before, is that the truth was always going to cost me something. The only thing I controlled was whether it cost everyone around me too. I chose wrong for a long time. My husband paid for it. My daughter is still paying for it. And I had to live inside that every day, without the protection of the lie that kept me from feeling how heavy it actually was. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. I sat in a plastic chair and stared at a water stain shaped like Florida. And everything I had been running from for 21 years finally caught up with me in a small office with mountain photos on the wall. I think, in the end, that was the most merciful thing that could have happened. Not for me, but for the people I love who deserved better than the life I had quietly built around my own fear. I'm still learning how to be someone who tells the truth before a door opens and does it for her. I'm not there yet, but for the first time in my adult life, I'm actually trying. I've had a lot of time to sit with what I did. Not to justify it, I stopped trying to do that somewhere around the 6th month of therapy when I realized that justification was just another form of escape, but to actually understand the mechanics of it. How a person builds a life on top of a lie and then has the nerve to be surprised when the foundation gives way. The thing about secrets is that they don't stay still. You think you've buried something, and it just keeps moving underground, shifting the soil, weakening things you can't see. I watched my husband build a bookshelf for Maisie in pale yellow. I watched him coach her soccer games in the rain. I watched him become the kind of father that most children will never have. And I let him do all of that without the one piece of information that was actually his to know. I made that choice for him. I decided what he could handle, what he deserved to know, what version of his own life he got to live. That is not love. That is control dressed up as protection. And what it cost him, 21 years of investment, in a story that had a different author than he knew. That cost was real. His grief in that office was real. The way he sat at our kitchen table in Mooresville and said everything he needed to say in that flat, precise, exhausted voice, that was a man settling an account that should never have been allowed to run that long. I think about Maisie too. She handled it with more grace than I deserved, and I've had to sit with that as well. The grace of a child who chooses to love her father anyway, who asks, does this change anything about who you are to me, instead of falling apart, that came from him. That steadiness, that loyalty, that instinct to hold on to what matters even when the ground shifts. She learned that from watching him for 18 years. Whatever she got from me, the grace wasn't it. What I know now is that honesty is not just a moral position. It's a practical one. The truth has a way of finding the moment when it will cause the most damage, not out of cruelty, but because that's simply what happens when you defer it long enough. Dr. Patterson didn't set out to end my marriage. A routine blood panel did. The universe is not dramatic about these things. It's just patient. And the hardest part isn't the loss of the marriage or the house or the version of my life I spent 2 decades maintaining. The hardest part is knowing that my husband is a good man who deserved a partner with the courage to match his character. That Maisie deserved a mother who modeled honesty when it was costly, not just when it was easy. That I had 21 years of small moments where I could have chosen differently, and I chose the easier thing every single time. I'm in a smaller house now, quieter life, more honest one. I don't know if that's enough to call it growth, but it's what I have. And for the first time in a very long time, what I have and what I'm showing the world are actually the same thing. That, I think, is where you have to start.